Welcome to episode 210 of the CUInsight Experience. I'm Randy Smith, one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com.
And I'm Jill Nowacki, founder and president and CEO of Humanidei.
This episode is sponsored by Alacrity, a leading payments fintech helping credit unions compete with challenger banks and digital wallets. Alacrity delivers seamless, real-time money movement experiences for loan payments, A2A transfers, digital disbursements, and bill pay with a single cloud-native platform that connects the clearinghouse, Fedwire, ACH, and FedNow. Credit unions can modernize without overhauling legacy infrastructure. Learn more at alacrity.com.
That is always a mouthful. Today, we're diving into the power of paradox, how leaders navigate those tensions that come with complexity, change, and growth.
Because leadership isn't always about having the answers. It's about holding the space for the both and the and, strength and humility, confidence and curiosity.
And to explore that topic today, we're joined by someone who knows this well, Greg Michlig, CEO of CUInsight. Greg brings a thoughtful, balanced approach to leadership that embraces the messiness of paradox and the power it holds.
We'll be talking about what it means to lead in uncertain times without pretending to be certain about everything.
How embracing dualities can make us more grounded, more effective, and more human as leaders.
And why the ability to sit with paradox might just be one of the most important leadership skills of our time.
That's right. Greg, we are so glad to have you with us today. Welcome to the show. Ready to kick things off?
Yeah. Thanks very much. Boy, you set the bar high with that introduction, so I will do my best.
Awesome. Excellent. So we're going to start off with an all play question. And you think about the paradoxes that you have had to hold as a leader, and which one has challenged or shaped you the most?
So for me, I think it really depends on the type of leader that you are. And of course, you asked this question of me. So from a servant leadership standpoint, which is kind of where I try to be as a leader, it's really leadership as a whole is a paradox. It's trying to put the needs of the team, the mission, and everything first and be authoritative or at least a leader in that way, but really making sure that you are involving the team and listening, and they may be looking to you to be that voice, but you really need to spend the time listening to them to shape your messaging. As far as an example, and maybe one of the defining moments is when I first became a CEO at the New Jersey Credit Union League. I felt prepared to handle many of the aspects of the business, leading our education strategy, building our revenue streams, advancing operational goals, those types of things. But the advocacy side really wasn't very familiar to me. I hadn't been in that realm before. So I needed to be the leader, but I had to rely on the expertise of my team. In that case, I know you know both of those folks that were there, Chris Abiel and Nicola Foggy, and really had to spend the time with them to listen and understand what was important in the realm of advocacy. I had to spend time with my board just to understand what they were looking for from the league in terms of advocacy. But at the end of the day, they were looking to me to be the leader of the organization and make the final decisions and put not just a strategy, but the execution model in place to make everything happen.
Yeah, that balance between being decisive and being collaborative is really important, right? If you're too collaborative, people are like, why can't he's the leader? Why can't he step up? But if you're too decisive, then you run that risk of making the wrong decision because it's not highly enough informed. Randy, what about you? What's one of your leadership paradoxes that's challenged or shaped you?
Oh, I think of times that I've had so much confidence in a meeting and also complete imposter syndrome on where not even having a clue where we're going, right? Like at the same time, sometimes in the same sentence, quite honestly. So when I think about it, I often think of the paradox of, and it was a lot of what you both were talking about, that sense of people like strong leaders and they like confidence and they like, that idea that you have an idea where you're going. But yet we all know that we don't totally know what that future direction looks like and that we can't get there alone. Or if we do, it's going to be a pretty heavy lift. So that's something that I think about often. I think about when we were getting ready for this episode, I kept thinking back to like that transition into a more leadership role compared to being kind of like a solo performer. Where it's like, it's very easy if something for me as an entrepreneur wasn't being done right, just to put my head down and do it. That doesn't really work that great when you're trying to build a bigger organization or team. So those were some of the things that I was thinking about, and if you want to say challenges that I've had over my career. I want to kind of jump to that. Like in my mind, confidence is an essential kind of trait of leadership, but so is humility. I feel like we've all been around enough that we've worked with leaders who just can't be wrong. And on the other side, I think, Jill, you mentioned if you're too collaborative too, there's the other side of that coin. So when I think of confidence, I also think of that blend of confidence and humility. Like, how do you personally balance that self-assuredness with also the openness to keep learning? How about that? And I guess either one of you can take that one.
So when you said imposter syndrome, that's one of the things that I think has come up for me over time. And maybe that example I shared at the league was part of it when I first stepped in there, again, leading in an environment where I didn't have that experience on the advocacy side. And it kind of goes to that whole idea of it can also be lonely at the top. People talk about speaking truth to power and all those kinds of things. And really, when you're trying to be a part of a team and you hear phrases like that, it makes it a challenge, right? It's like truth to power. Well, I'm not power. I'm just someone who's trying to get the job done with you. And you want to make sure that you're communicating that to your team as well, so they feel comfortable with it. You also talked about confidence. And I think for me, that just comes from preparation. So when I did walk into that situation, and when I have walked into other situations over my career where I may have had to catch up with the team, the preparation and the focus and listening to the team to make sure you understand what it is they need from you is where I get my confidence from. So I know that I don't know everything, and that's probably a good thing. And, the bigger the crowd, the more likely it is that I know that I probably know less than on any specific topic than most of the people, if not all of the people in the room. And that's okay too, because I was hired in that instance and in other instances to lead a team. And that's a different skill set as well.
Randy, you asked that question about balancing self-assurance with that openness to being wrong. And sometimes I hear people say, is it more important to you to be right or to get it right? And how I would maybe restate that even is because like that concept of being right, it's really, is it more important to you that there's an appearance of you being right? Because if you don't get it right, then you didn't be right. I think that a leader can, when they can reframe this and think, instead of me showing up and looking like I have the right answers right out of the gate,
right?
What I can emphasize is that because of the way I lead, our team gets the right results as we move forward. And I think that creates then a level of self-assurance that like gives you valid reasons to be confident, something other than just, well, I got the title, so trust me. And I think that can be a really important sort of gut check on this am I more concerned about getting this right, or am I more concerned about whether or not I appear to have all the answers?
Yeah, I think transparency in that instance is really important too. I think you establish trust with your team by being the person to acknowledge the fact that, I don't know. That's not an answer that I have for you right now. I can go research that. I can find the answer. We can do it together. But being willing to be vulnerable enough to, as a leader, to say, that's a great question. That's something that I hadn't thought about. That is an expertise that I don't have right now. In fact, that's why you're here, is because I'm not the one that can do the back end UX UI on the website, but I can certainly provide the resources or help you get the answers you need to be able to do those things. So yeah, I think that's one of the biggest pieces for me in leadership, is to establish trust by acknowledging the fact that you need your team there with you because you don't have all the answers all of the time.
I kind of want to add to that and kind of throw it back to both of you on this. I found one of the most powerful things in, if you want to say, my career journey, I wouldn't even say leadership journey, was getting to a point where it was like what Greg just said, that it's a perfectly acceptable answer to say, I don't know. And I remember whenever I got to that point early on, it was CUInsight, it was with the follow up, but I'll find out. And then making sure to follow through on my word that, and that was a perfectly acceptable answer. I often have come across, and you both have actually led a whole lot more people than I have over our careers, where younger folks, I know I was one of them, earlier in my career, often think they have to have the answer in that moment. And, it's one of those things where I feel like, to anybody who's been around the block a little bit, when you hear that person, you're like, that's not the answer. You shouldn't have answered that. Why are you inserting that? So is this in your leadership journey, in your experience, you leading other people, is this something that is taught, or that there needs to be a focus on?
I'm going to do a quick, not in my leadership journey, but kind of a data and statistics element, which I think is really interesting. So think about what an MBA is. It's literally a master's in business administration, like the administrative side of running a business. And Harvard did a study to say, what we've recognized is that in times of uncertainty, it's not administration that's critical, it's leadership that's critical. And so even the Harvard's business school curriculum has changed a lot over the last decade to go far more from that administrative work in the MBA program to more of that leadership work. And with that leadership work, that's where these ideas of, in a time of uncertainty, you don't have all the answers. So how do you effectively navigate change management? How do you effectively solicit the opinions of others and get their engagement and their buy-in with that? So I think there's certainly probably a maturity as in our individual leadership journeys, that the further along we get, the more we realize that I shouldn't have this textbook answer to everything. But it sounds like there's also a workplace evolution that's coming too, that's saying, hey, the world's a little different than it was in 1985. And what we do today to lead organizations has to look more like leadership and less like administration too.
Yeah, I go back to, it's probably when I was at Pemco Technologies and I was sales and account management in payments processing, credit, debit, ATM card processing. I didn't know that business before I got there. I was hired because I was good at relationships, and I actually had worked with them as a salesperson to them when I was at CUIs, and they liked my style. So I came in and started doing that for them. So I had to learn that side of the business. But that's when, I think it was Brad Campbell, who was my boss at the time, who I've always admired in his leadership style, was the one that said, it's okay to be talking to someone and say, yeah, I don't know, but I will find out, to your point, Randy, right? So that was a while ago, and that was a coaching instance from a former leader of mine. So I don't know that it's necessarily a new thought, but it's also something that if someone doesn't tell it to you, or if you don't listen to maybe a podcast like this where someone's talking about it, as times have changed obviously over the years, but as you are coming up through your career, oftentimes you'll be looking at the leader and thinking, well, that person's standing in the front of the room and giving us all the answers. So to be a leader, I must need to have all of the answers. And unless you articulate to your team that, hey, I need you because I don't have all the answers, you are just leading them down the same path of, well, I can't be a leader unless I have all the answers. So part of being a good leader is acknowledging transparently that I don't have all the answers. I can get the answers. I can be your strong leader and advocate for you. There's a reason why I'm in this seat and can provide vision and strategy and tie things together. But that doesn't mean that I'm omnipotent and can answer everything. And either say.
Good word there. Good word.
If I could speak.
I think another thing, we've spent a lot of time about talking about this sort of paradox of open and reflective versus certain, like that, having all the answers, being decisive versus collaboration. But I think there are a lot of other times when this both and comes into our leadership journeys and leading organizations as well. And one of them that I see happen really often, particularly with CEOs who are maybe in their first 3 years in the CEO seat, where there's this ambition to come in and like, we've got to get things done. And so we've got to get things done. Therefore, we have to move really fast. And this actually reminds me of a well-known African proverb, the one like, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And so I see a lot of times this challenge that new leaders come where they're like, there's so much we want to accomplish. We got to get in. We got to be aggressive. We got to push fast. And then it runs the risk of maybe burning out a team or not getting great results on it. And so there's this paradox as well of really bold vision, really eager for growth, but then having to be really patient because you can't achieve your big vision unless you get everybody on board with that. And so sometimes you do have to slow down to speed up, I guess, to use like a perfect paradoxical thought on that. So, and Randy, you're probably, of the three of us, you're actually probably the fastest paced of us, I think, as far as you want something done, you want it done now. And so, but you've also seen a lot of other leaders in the space too. And what kind of lessons have you learned about trying to go fast and figuring out, oh, you gotta step back and reassess here?
I think back to like when Dave and I were building CUInsight and things of that nature, and it was moving fast. I also tend to wake up early, and that's when my brain doesn't work real well after about noon, but it works great about 5 a.m. So,
gotta love that, Greg.
Right. So the amount of times where it was like, oh my God, we can do this and this and this and this. And then I had to be like, oh, wait, it's only 9:07 on a Monday morning. We can't do all of that today. We have other stuff that has to be done. I do think that that's something that I've had to learn much more over time. It helps having an executive coach in the house, and that was such a difference. Even like as I look back at whether it's working directly with Greg as our CEO or when it was hiring our first CEO, Lauren, before that, where, often I was like, okay, we got to do X, Y, Z. And Jill would say, slow down. Can that wait until? And I was like, all right, fine. So that is something that I think I've gotten better about. I know it's by far not a fix, but it's something that I have to focus on, where it's like it came out of my mouth. So why aren't we doing it? Yeah. Why isn't it already done, actually? I mean, come on. So
I mentioned that 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. Didn't I mention that 2 weeks ago? Why are we not done with this? Like, why are we not the best at it in the entire world? So, that to me is that has been I would say a struggle in that leadership journey. So there is that paradox of wanting to be innovative, wanting to move forward. People on the podcast have heard me say, to me, standing still means you're going backwards. So, how do you keep that flow and the momentum? But as you were mentioning, and keep those ideas coming and the creativity going, because nothing kills creativity in my mind than when it doesn't come to fruition ever or something like that. But how do you also balance that to understand that not everybody works at 5 a.m.? Other people are really productive at 11 p.m. I don't know. That's just the truth. And how also some people, we've talked a lot on the podcast with different leaders about that idea of we all move at different paces of change. Some of us need to really wrap our head around things, and others of us are just like, let's give it a shot. So, I mean, I do think that that's a interesting paradox. I also think it's an interesting one, and I'd love to hear from both of you, where it's like, sometimes that individual contributor really gets rewarded in the early phases of whether it's careers or companies. And then as you move into the leadership side, there is a different mindset. So, I mean, that needs, if you want to bring people along with you, like you said, Jill, if you want to go far, you're not doing that alone, right? So,
Well, for one, Randy, I know you and I are both get fairly eager at times. And so that can be a dangerous combination. And I have worked myself over the years to try and be more patient when it comes to things. And my excitement about CUInsight and our opportunities and what I saw coming in, I may have pushed the envelope myself a little bit over the first few months with the team. But again, we've had those transparent conversations about what's our pace? Is this comfortable? Are we able to do this? Should we slow down a little bit? And, as you know, the team at CUInsight is gung-ho and wants to put it all out there. So sometimes I even try and check myself on behalf of them, because I realize if I just keep throwing ideas out, they will be ready to execute. And I can't put them in that position as well. And that's part of leadership. But I also think there is an organizational component to this. So, my first CEO position was with the league, which is, you quite frankly don't often think of a league as being, fast paced, right? There's a lot of things tied into it with advocacy and legacy type relationships with other organizations and those types of things. But when I got to New Jersey, I felt like I had the opportunity to make some decisions and move some things around because my board empowered me to do those things and gave me the opportunity to do it. So I felt like, I could move, maybe not like a jet fighter, but I could at least move a little bit. And then I went to a really large organization, CUNA, America's Credit Unions, but it was CUNA at that point. And just because of the size of the organization, because of the number of components involved in what they did, things move slower. And so that's where, from a patient standpoint, I really learned a lot in terms of what it takes to get everyone on board with an idea that you may think is, wow, this is a no-brainer. We should move this thing forward. And even maybe I had the buy-in from Jim Nussel that said, yeah, that's a great concept. You'd think that would be enough to move things forward pretty quickly. But when it's a large organization, you have to get all the stakeholders involved. You need to have the conversations. There may be overlap of what you're thinking with other things that seem similar. I've got a prime example in my head that I had to go out and say, well, it's not really that, but I understand your concern, right? I understand why you think that might be a conflict. And so you try and build through it by getting buy-in from everyone, by having the conversations, by understanding what the barriers and the blockers might be. And I think through that process, it made me take a strategic mindset into one that is much more useful in an organization, right? You've got to think through start to finish. I could think out 5 years and have a strategy in place to do things, but you have to take into consideration all the components of the organization. And that now carries through into a small organization too. When you think about all the things that factor into a decision and what that means for the long term. So that all took place in an environment where we're also going through transformation and rapid transformation, because Jim and I worked with Molly Bell. She was there as our chief transformation officer. We were changing things, shaking things up at CUNA on the regular, from our tech stack to our member service to everything all the way along. And that also made people feel uncomfortable because there is a lot of change going on in an organization that doesn't change very fast. And so you had to balance that uncomfortable environment for your team with the fact that this is going to be a long haul. And so you had to talk with them about, for the technology that we have to change, this is a multi-year large dollar investment for our organization. So how do we get there together? How do we build what we need to do within the strategy in a way that's going to be effective for all of us? So moving fast at the same time as moving slow. And that's the paradox that really, I think I learned maybe the most from was during that time at CUNA.
There's a planning paradox that comes in there too when you talk about that. So this idea of, hey, you've got to think about all of the elements that are going to be impacted. So you have to think about where the objections might be, all those things that could potentially go wrong, where it's going to create pain points in the organization, where there might be challenges. But when you're talking about change management and getting people on board, there are also two other things you have to be able to balance that ability to so keen ability to see all those obstacles that might come, balanced with an ability to infuse optimism into that so that the team thinks, yeah, we can. It's worth it. It's going to be painful. It's going to be challenging. You're going to move my cheese all over the place. But at the end of the day, where we end up will make this worth it. And I think that's another one of those key paradoxes, that ability to say, I know it's going to be tough and we're going to be happy with the outcome from doing that hard thing too.
Right. And by having the conversations with them, you get their buy-in, because you gather their insights and you bring those to those executive team meetings where, quite frankly, I mean, you've got the executive team and you've got your project management team in there that's throwing maybe curveballs at you because I'm not a project manager, right? And we're sitting there looking at our resource and looking at our, what we have available going forward. And you need to be able to advocate for your team and say, these are the things that are important, but you also need to turn around and be able to advocate for project management, the executive team, the decisions that are being made, because there's a balance, right? There's, we can only move so fast, or we can only do so much. But at the same time, we heard you. We heard what you were saying. We know that's important, and that needs to be incorporated into our decision making as well.
Something I was thinking about, and I'll throw this question out there, is whether it's Humanidei or CUInsight or credit unions or the credit union movement, there is that legacy sense of it. So that paradox between honoring the legacy that's made us what we are and who we are and moving forward, that you do have to do. Honoring the past, both of you know, one of my biggest pet peeves is that idea when somebody comes in or when we're trying to do something different, we think we have to completely tear down, rip on, do whatever about the past. And that idea, whether it's credit unions, we can all go, oh, we move slow. We also can move fast. But how do we honor that legacy that made us who we are and bring that with us as we move forward in the future?
This actually makes me think of a story that I haven't really thought of before, and I've never thought about it really in this context. But a job I had a couple of jobs ago was being an executive at MAPS Credit Union. And I left MAPS on great terms. I left it because I had the chance to go be the CEO of the Credit Union League of Connecticut. And they had to hire someone to replace me when I left. And they hired a guy named Shane Saunders, who did that job for a while in an evolved capacity. And now he's the CEO at Moxie Credit Union out in Northern California. But I didn't know Shane before he was hired at MAPS. He was our connection was, he was my successor. And somebody who I once succeeded said to me, you're probably the best possible person to actually evaluate how good I was at my job because you inherited what I left behind, which is an interesting bond you kind of share with somebody when you've sort of taken the job on after them. But a couple of months after Shane was hired, I ran into him at GAC. We met for the first time, and he was being very humble and somewhat apologetic about some changes he had made to something that I had created. And I remember having that conversation with him and thinking, oh my gosh, how can this guy feel like he's not allowed to touch something I left behind because one time I built it? And the realization I had is, what a crappy legacy if what you've built is all the further that can ever grow, because that's not it dies then, and then it's not there anymore at all. And so in this case, I had worked with the CEO at MAPS to stand up a 501c3 foundation. If that foundation never got any bigger than in its founding year, that's not good. That's not something to be proud of. If the best an organization could ever be was when I was in charge of it 15 years ago, I didn't build the right thing. And that's not a legacy at all. And I think that's maybe the realization is that your legacy is only as good as what happens to it after you're gone is probably extremely humbling, because it kind of gives us sort of a reality check of, you are one tiny little speck in this universe for this very little infinitesimally small amount of time. But we think we did this, we built that, we're such a big deal when we're actually in the moment with it.
That's a great example. And I have some kind of a different angle in my mind, but I really love kind of that idea of it being a poor legacy or a crappy legacy, as you said, to leave to someone that
that's a technical term,
right? Yeah, that to grow beyond what you did is a bad thing. I mean, that,
right.
And I think that, when you think about, the legacy of the credit union system and movement, the idea of it's really the advocacy argument, right? I mean, it's about the form of the organization. Credit unions are not-for-profit financial institutions that are there to serve communities and to make lives better for, their members. And, the cool thing about CUInsight is we can be unabashed cheerleaders for the credit union industry. That's what we do. And that's what I've said to people since I've been here. And they say, tell me about CUInsight. I said, we're here for thought leadership and to provide best practices and content that will help grow the industry. And we just want, again, to be cheerleaders for the industry, right? So that can all be true at the same time that I can walk into, Valera's, the Valera Live conference or the Edge 25 conference I was just at with Trellance and Filene and QDEX, where they're doing demos and the rooms are filled with fintech companies and they're talking about agentic AI and how are we moving things forward, and the pace of change is rapid, right? So we talk about perhaps credit unions have a history or a legacy of being slow moving. That doesn't necessarily translate into some of the things I've been seeing lately.
That's not a core value. Slow moving is not a core value of the industry.
Yeah.
Jill, I think about that a lot with something that like Dave and I had to kind of have that kind of come to Jesus moment with, where over the past, say, 6 or 7 years, where it was like, we're very proud of what we created building CUInsight. And when, Greg was coming on board, we were like, and we're very proud of the chapter and what Lauren created. And we can't wait to see what Greg's is. And in all honesty, but I say it humbly, what that looks like today is much different than what Dave and I created 16 years ago. And it would continue to. And if it didn't, goodness, like you said, that'd be really laughable, quite honestly.
It wouldn't exist anymore, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would not be here because there wouldn't be no place to be.
That's right. That's exactly it. So. Jill, you spent a lot of time with this topic. Is there one more? I'm looking at my fancy stopwatch. Is there one more kind of talking point before we kind of wrap it up and share kind of our key takeaways that you want to make sure we're talking about here today?
Yeah. So when I started off, the first question I asked was, when you think about the paradoxes that you've had to hold as a leader, which one has challenged or shaped you the most? And neither of you said the one that for me has been kind of the most personally challenging or shaping. And it's this idea that as a leader, it is your responsibility to, and there are so many probably quotes out there, like, people want to know how much you care before they care how much you know, or but these ideas that you have to hold people accountable while also holding them close. And so infusing that warmth and empathy. And I think early in my career, first time I was a manager, I really struggled with this idea because it was kind of in my mind. I thought, well, if I build a good rapport with somebody, if they like me enough, then they'll do their job. And I don't have to worry about making sure that they do their job, because they'll do it because they like me and they wouldn't want to let me down. And in reality, that's not how team members work. Like, they might like you and they might still need to be held accountable. And so probably one of the reasons this sticks is because after really my first really challenging experience with that warmth and empathy versus like enforcing rules, a different team I had gave me a boss's day card. And so this is the quote that's probably stuck with me now for 15 years since then. And for fans of the American version of The Office, the card is Steve Carell as the character Michael Scott. And it's this concept of like, as a leader, would I rather be feared or loved? And Michael Scott's response is easy, both. I want people to be afraid of how much they love me. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's probably like, if I'm being real, that is probably my biggest leadership paradox to overcome is, can I accept that I can love my people they can love me back, and I can still insist that they perform at their highest possible contributing value. And in fact, actually say, because I love you that much, I'm going to hold you accountable to be your absolutely best self here at work. So that's probably my favorite leadership paradox, not just because of the Michael Scott embodiment of that quote, but because I do think that is what is so important, is how do you lead people in this really high touch human way, especially in an uncertain environment, and make sure that the organization still thrives and you still get the results you need to.
That's good stuff right there. Okay, so I'm watching our time, and we want to be respectful of everybody else's. So this year, before we sign off, we've been trying to leave everybody with a takeaway, because it's a good conversation without some parting wisdom. Greg, we'll let you go last, since you might not have known that you had to come up with a takeaway.
All right.
But I'll throw this one.
Thank you for the time to prepare mentally.
Right, yeah. Right. Well, how did you know what the conversation was going to be?
You don't have to have all the answers, right?
We want to keep it loose and flowing. So, Jill, but we're going to start with you. So what's your key takeaway? And then I'll throw mine out there, and then we will finish with Greg.
So we didn't really talk about it in this conversation, but what I'll say about the value of being able to sort of get a handle on paradoxical leadership is that, there's 60 years ago or so, everybody wanted to talk about situational leadership. Like, I'm going to be a situational leadership, but I'm going to apply it. I think paradoxical leadership is essentially this idea of like situational leadership amped up to an 11. And because what it allows is for, instead of me to say, well, what's the situation? I'll apply something. If a person can truly master that both and ability, like hold these two incongruent ideas, then sort of whatever they encounter, they have a strength that they can draw from, so they can operate with a high level of balance. And we see then in that leader's behavior, we sort of know what kind of balance we're going to get from them. So I think that's the idea here, is when we can wrap our heads around operating in the gray, living with contradiction, paradoxes, what it enables is for us to be like balanced, frankly, stable leaders for our teams and our organizations.
I started laughing as you were talking because a thought ran through my head. That's the monkey mind that just keeps going. So I'm kind of changing up my takeaway on the fly. But it's that idea that like good leadership isn't having all the answers, but it is providing that maybe a certain calmness, like that you're steering the ship. And then what made me laugh was I was like, while you're Googling how to steer a ship at the same time, right? So it's like, I was like, oh yeah, to me, that's the paradox, right? It's like, okay, you're providing that calmness in the mess, in whatever's happening at that point in time. So that's mine. Provide that calmness. And
so to me, it goes back maybe to that servant leadership piece, and just, you talked about incongruent ideas, Jill, and the fact that if you think back in history, there was a leader and then the leader had a servant, right? I mean, if you're in the medieval movies or whatever, anything like that, right? So how can you be both? How can you be a servant and how can you be a leader? And I think it's that, again, having that ability to articulate to your team that I can be a servant, but that doesn't mean I'm doing your job for you. It means I am giving you the tools as a servant that will enable you to be successful in your role. And and that's part of my leadership for you. And so I think that's, just kind of listening through all of this, it has helped me get to that hurdle, because that's always been a phrase that has been kind of knocking around in my head about servant leadership. It's like, I get it, but I don't know if I can articulate it. And maybe I just did, which might make me feel pretty good about the time that we've spent today.
That's probably the perfect way to wrap this thing up then. I mean,
all right.
Greg's growing and we're all laughing and smiling. But before we do go, a few things as always. We will link to everything that we talked about today in the show notes. So be sure to check those out. Jill's always lighting up LinkedIn, and so is Greg. And I've been trying to get on there more too. So we'd love to hear from you. Drop us us a message, share your thoughts, share the episode. Let us know what topics or guests you'd like to hear from next. We have some really cool ones coming up along the same kind of arc of leadership. A big thank you to our sponsor, Alacrity, leading payment fintech, helping credit unions compete with those challenger banks and digital wallets. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the CUInsight Experience on your favorite podcast player. We are on them all: Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you may listen. Just give us a follow there. I don't think we mentioned any books today, but if you want to read, the summer read coming up, you can always Google the CUInsight Experience podcast book list, and you'll find some recommendations from past shows. And of course, a huge thank you to Greg for joining us. We will also link to the last time Greg was on the podcast because he is a repeat visitor. And also link to Greg's got a great new podcast that's out there that we'll link to as well. So we'll make sure to get everything that's going on there. So thank you, Greg, for being here.
My pleasure.
And also, thank you to my intelligent and gorgeous co-host. This is so much fun doing this with you, the love of my life. So thank you all for tuning in. Y'all rock. We are grateful for every single one of you. Be well, friends, and we will talk to you next time.